All I could hear from the top floor was, "Hey, Dad, can we get some A5 Wagyu?" My 13-year-old son's voice rings out, and I'm thinking, are you crazy, boy? That's what I'm thinking in my head. Like, what do you know about A5 Wagyu? And then he goes into this whole dissertation, almost giving me a thesis on his doctorate from YouTube on what A5 Wagyu is, how to cook it, how to make the crust, how to be able to cook it to a perfect medium rare. And that's when I realized that our wisdom comes from what we consume. See, he had been consuming so much YouTube. He had been consuming, Guga and Nick DiGiovanni, who hopefully we're going to have on the podcast very soon. And I realized how powerful it was what he was consuming. Because what he was consuming was coming out of his mouth. His wisdom, his knowledge, all came from what he consumed. And so in Proverbs 14, it strongly urges us to consume wisdom. So why don't we get this party started?
Nothing more on my mind. I got two shines, so every day I grind. Work in the morning, work in the evening. We's achieving, cause we believing. It's for certain, we put the work in. We ain't stopped just because it's hurting. Right before your eyes, so it's coming to no surprise. The takeover is televised. Over and over and over again. Make no mistake, we continue to win. Defeat never known, cause I will not lose. They wanna mimic my moves, but can't walk in my shoes.
What do you know about A5 Wagyu, son? My son schooled me that day when I asked him what A5 Wagyu he was talking about. Well, what he was talking about is what he had been watching on YouTube. And thank you, Guga. Thank you, Nick DiGiovanni, for your incredible wisdom. But I noticed that what my son was consuming was starting to come out of his mouth. And also, I was thinking, man, I'm going to show him how to cook a steak. But then we went to the store, we got the Wagyu. He created the perfect crust on it, knew exactly the timing, how to be able to, dry brine it, how to, put the crust to it, how to cook it to a perfect medium rare with a pink all the way through. I mean, this kid is a genius. And then I realized too, what he was consuming and what God was saying in Proverbs 14 is, imagine if you consumed wisdom the way that your son is consuming YouTube. Well, I'm not hating on him for YouTube. I was just talking with my buddy Gary today. Coach Gary, I love you so much. We were talking and he's like, just got to get these kids off the devices. I said, how much of it is it that we need to get the kids off the devices? And how much is it that we're a little bit jealous that we didn't have as cool of devices as they do? Because I can remember for myself playing Nintendo or on a Game Boy, which I didn't have. If I would have had a Game Boy, I would have been playing on the bus the whole time because, it just it's funny because we give our kids such a hard time, but if we would have had the opportunity to be able to have the technology that they do and be able to talk to their friends, like play games with their friends. We used to have to go over to their house, ride the bike, but now they can actually play from home and they can FaceTime and they can do all those things. Now, I'm not saying be on it all the time and people are going to argue that fact, but a lot of it is my generation, that 40 to 50-year-old parent is just kind of mad. I think that's we're saying like, man, I didn't have that. So ease up a little bit on them, and but understand that what we consume becomes our wisdom, right? And so in Proverbs 14, it was incredible because it kind of broke this down. And in verse 1. Verse 10, verse 13, 22, and 26, it asked, are you building or are you tearing down? Are you building up with the things that you consume, or are you tearing things down? And if we're constantly tearing things down, just be kind of conscious, because what God is always talking about through 3,000-year-old wisdom is always building something. So as opposed to trying to tear down what our kids are doing, why don't we build them up and ask them the questions? How can you start to, like with my son, he's now getting into food. He's, getting around chefs. He's, not getting around them. He's doing it through YouTube. And you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to have them here on the podcast so I can interview them. And then my son will watch it for the first time and he'll be connected with it. But then he'll see that these, Gugas of the world and the Nick Giovanni are not idols. They're just icons, and you could be inspired by them. And maybe it turns into a profession for him. Maybe it's just a passion for him. But whatever he's consuming is becoming his wisdom. If this is the first time you're tuning into the podcast, this is an episode of Inchstones. We do 3 different episodes on the podcast itself. So we do Inchstones, which is a daily, 15, 20 minute. You can take us on your walk, and just fills up the soul. We study 3,000-year-old wisdom and how it can be applicable today. We also, I'd invite you, if you want the production notes and to join the Substack, please do that. That would make my day. We did the Substack, and what I'm doing is imperfect, handwritten notes of encouragement from someone who's in it. That's basically what it is. And so, I'm sharing this wisdom, and I'm giving you the production notes, but I'm doing them handwritten because I want it to be a very personal thing to be able to share, which I think is kind of cool. So, let's go, let's move on in verse 19, 21, 24, 31, and 34. And again, anytime it hits on that many, actually, you know what? It's verse 2, 6, 9, 12, 14, 19, 21, 24, 31, and 34. That's a lot of verses, right? And so listen to this. Right is simple. Foolish is complicated. And when I wrote that out this morning while I was reading Proverbs 14, it hit me so strong. Right is always simple. Foolish is always complicated. And when we get, most of the time, people complicate things up. I find this in business. They complicate things up because they're afraid of losing their job, or they're protecting their job. So they're not playing to win. They're playing not to lose. And they don't want to lose something, so they complicate things up so they seem more important. Whereas you find that people that walk in and that are doing the right thing, they make it as simple as possible because they want you to be the one that the light is shining on. Keep it simple. Right is simple. Foolish is complicated. In verse 3, 5, 7, and 25, watch this. Listen, 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 and then speak. This is something that I've failed at a ton. This one slapped me in the face this morning while I was reading it. I was at the beach, studying Proverbs 14, and when I did, I looked at it, I was like, wow, that's strong. Listen, 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 and then speak. Man, I got to sit in that one for a second. In verse 4 and 23, is clean and comfortable, produces no crops. Where there's not a mess, where, like when you're working and people are constantly asking, like, what's the life hack? What's the hack here? And what's the hack there? I could tell you the hack. Hard work and time. When you put in the work and you put a lot of time into it, you'll get better at it. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't work smart. Like, you want to work smart, not just hard, right? But once you understand what the smart work is, you want to work hard at that. And I tell you, wherever there's not, a little bit of a mess, there's not going to be much crop at all. Where's the crop come from? For fertilizer. What is fertilizer? It's poop, right? And so when there's poop all over the place, it's fertilizing things, but be okay with things being a little messy, because a clean and comfortable environment produces no crops. In verse 8, 15, 18, 29, and 35 of Proverbs 14, thought of the future reconciles the past and brings the present into precise focus. Man, oh man. Let me say it again. Thought of the future, which is prudence, reconciles the past and brings the present into precise focus. If you could focus precisely on the present right now, exactly what you're doing, you'll find that there's opportunities that you didn't even see. And this is a part where I really want to encourage you. I want to encourage every single person that is listening to the podcast. Jimmy, thank you so much for tuning in. Stacy, thank you so much for tuning in. Mr. Mike Bender, I appreciate you. I got a chance to be able to see you on our walk the other day, and I appreciate you. And when I take thought of the future, it reconciles the past, and it allows the past to just be there, and I respect it, but I reconcile it. It doesn't have to, I don't have to hold on to it anymore. And then it brings the present into precise focus. In verse 11, 16, 17, 27, the house of the foolish pales in comparison to the tent of the wise. That one hit me like a ton of bricks this morning at the beach. As I was sitting there, I was like, wow, a house is less valuable than a tent? Well, the house of the foolish pales in comparison to the tent of the wise. So seek wisdom. Where do we get wisdom? It's the right use of knowledge. It comes from the fear of God. Spend time with him. And some are like, well, my God is different. That's okay. Seek your God. Spend time. But what I would suggest is I would check the character as much as humanly possible. Before you start to reverence something, check the character. And that's what I would do as much as humanly possible, although you didn't ask, but I was giving you that advice no matter what. So in verse 30 and 33, peace brings life. When you're peaceful in a situation, right? And so peaceful comes from knowing the future. And if you know the future and how the story ends, peace will abound. And it doesn't mean that you are a fortune teller or anything like that. It just means that if you know how things turn out, and when you know how things turn out, it's just spending time with the one who created it in the first place. That'll bring peace, and that peace will bring life into every single thing that you possibly can touch. And as we finish up in verse 32, wisdom brings strength before it is needed. If you seek wisdom, it's almost like you gain up strength for the battle that you haven't even seen yet. But when the battle arrives, the preparation is already past. Like, you cannot prepare in the time of battle. Once the battle hits, you got to be prepared or you're not. And I used to do this with tests. I used to tell my mom, like, oh, well, there's no sense in cramming tonight, because the test is tomorrow. Well, that makes sense if you've studied the whole entire time, and then you just kind of say, I won't do it anymore tonight. But I wouldn't study at all, and then the night before I wouldn't do anything either. But preparation, guys, like when wars are won in peacetime preparation. But when the battle starts, the opportunity for preparation is already gone, and wisdom will bring strength before it's ever needed. You see, Maddox A5 Wagyu wisdom comes from his mass consumption of Guga and Nick DiGiovanni. If our wisdom comes from our consumption, don't you think it would be wise to start to consider what we're consuming? What I would invite you to do is consume Proverbs 14. It is a wealth of knowledge. It's a wealth of wisdom. It'll lift you up that way. And it really hit me today, because when I was looking at it, I was thinking, like, okay, so what am I consuming? What's the music that I'm consuming? What are the people that I'm around? What are all these things? But when it comes down to it, what God is saying is just, if you'll just spend some time with me, I created it all. And it's my purpose, my plan, and my timing, and I'll take care of it. So take a little bit of time and consume him, and consume that wisdom that he will give you because you spent time with him and respected him. So I want to thank you all for tuning in to another episode of Inchstones. It is my absolute pleasure. Make sure you check us out on Substack too. The Vibe Room is coming. It's actually, I said April 11th the last couple of days, but it's actually April 12th that we're going to be releasing tickets. So our Substack, like I said, is available for subscription there. Subscribe to us there. It would mean the world. Do it here on the podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, all the things, and share it with someone who you know needs to hear the message. So I want to thank you all again. My name is Kelly Cardenas, and I'm officially off the hot seat. Peace, love, and soul.